Thank you for joining today's Fiber Broadband Association webinar titled Visualizing Success in RDOF, Part 2, Do-It-Yourself Data and Design. My name is Doug Weinbaum, and I'm the Senior Operations Coordinator for FBA. Before we get started, I'm going to briefly go over a few logistical items. Please keep in mind all participants are in listen mode only. To ask a question during the presentation, please type them into the question box located within your control panel. We'll host a Q&A session towards the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Webinars drop-down option. At the conclusion of the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief feedback survey. We appreciate your input. I now pass it over to Jim Stegman, CEO of CostQuest Associates, to begin today's presentation. Jim?
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for attending our Part 2 version of Visualizing Your Success in RDOF. So if you were on our last presentation, what we covered is just a brief RDOF tutorial. We provided a checklist of how to prepare, where do you start. We overviewed a simple business case, and then the final step after you win of managing the network. So today we want to do a deeper dive into preparing your business case, the data that you would need to develop to set your strategy, the tools and data to consider, and how to manage that network once you win. If you would like to look at that last presentation, it is available on the CostQuest website on the home page under the latest news. You can click on the link and view that prior presentation. If you do have questions about it, please feel free to reach out to us and we can answer any questions that you may have. So today's speakers will be myself, Jim Stegman. I am President and CEO of CostQuest Associates. Joining me is Will Mitchell, who is CEO of Vetro FiberMap. And assisting Will today will be Nick Roy, who will walk through a live demo. Before I start, I want to just do some updates of the prior material, given that the FCC did issue the final RDOF rules. So I just want to highlight what has changed since our last presentation, and the highlight is in orange. So the final auction procedures were published on May 19th. And they are available, and I would recommend that you read those and study those to make sure you understand how this auction will work. The final eligible areas have not yet been published. They should be published before the end of the short form application window. We just do not know when they will be published. The short form application deadline is now set at July 15th. The window opens, I think, on July 1st. But you have to have your final application in by July 15th. And then the auction start was moved back 1 week to October 29th. Other changes that came out, and not necessarily a change, but just affirming of the rules. The geographic unit of bidding was set at the Census Block group level. Originally, it was either at the Census Block group or at the census tract. It was settled at the Census Block group. The FCC, as I indicated, will release the updated list of eligible areas and reserve prices based upon the challenge. We are waiting on the results of the challenge process before that final list comes out. I would strongly encourage you to use the preliminary list to start your efforts now, and then you can simply update that when the final list comes out. And the last thing is, just as we discussed last time, you really need to bring in experts into your group or have this expertise available to make sure that you're prepared for this auction. It's a once-in-a-decade auction of $16 billion. So what you do now is important to how you succeed in that auction on October 29th. So today we're going to expand on the data and analytics that we think you should think about as you put together your business case. While Will and I may focus on our tools and our data, we're going to make it as generic as possible so that you can shoehorn this into your approach. We're not saying our data is the end-all be-all, but rather we're using our data as just a demonstration tool today. So as we mentioned last time, where do you start in your process of trying to understand how to bid, where to bid? One is make sure you download the FCC data and read that RDOF order. Two, you need to select the census blocks that you're interested in the census block groups. And we'll walk through how you may do that. And then three, we recommend that you get a data set of locations to help understand where it is you need to bid, what you're going to have to build out, and the economics that sit behind the bids you want to put together. So really, visual inspection is the key to understand where you want to bid. And again, we'll show you some examples of that. And locations really matter. The FCC has published location counts, but we know those may change and will likely change, and you will be held accountable to where it is 8 years from now. And knowing that locations are a big driver of broadband deployment cost, that is why it is key. However, if you're putting together your economic business case, the FCC location counts are not of much use. And I say that for three specific reasons. One is they do not provide any locational data, so there's no indication of where you need to build. Second, the counts are only at the CBG, so it's just a total count. So there is no indication of how many locations are in each of the census block, nor in the surrounding areas. You'll likely not just build to the RDOF census blocks. You may and likely will connect into census blocks outside the eligibility list. And there really is nothing in the FCC data to provide you those location counts as well. And finally, the counts are based upon dated information. So we know that those counts are likely potentially 5 to 10 years old, and we know things have changed since then. So it's really important to understand how those changes have occurred and understand the areas you're going to be building into. So you need good locational data, whether it's ours, your own, or your build some. And if it is your own, there's one important thing that we've learned over the last couple of months working with clients. If you're thinking of using your own internal address records, we have found with a number of our clients that you may miss up to 20% of the locations in the area. And that's likely due to the fact that your address database is built from experience. If these are customers that we have served, or you may have bought an address list at some point in time, you just want to make sure you have a complete information set for the auction. So let's start with what are the RDOF areas of interest. So this is a nationwide map showing that reserve price or what reserves are available across the country. It's hard to, at this scale, it's hard to make any decisions, but what we're showing here is actually the census blocks across the census block groups across the country. On the next map, we jump into the state of Ohio. No reason other than I'm based out of Ohio, so I thought this would be easy for me to understand. And you can see the RDOF reserve price is higher in more rural parts of the state. This is the Appalachian part of the state of Ohio. And as you would suspect, the relative teledensity in those areas is relatively low, which leads to the high reserve price level. So again, you need to look at these maps, understand where it is you want to bid, understand what it is you're bidding on, and understand what is underneath these images. For example, if you look at this next image, we took one of the census block groups that are in the current preliminary list. We mapped the two census blocks that make up that census block group. And lo and behold, the census blocks are actually road segments. So while the FCC data may have locations in here, the actual census blocks are actually roadways. So it's important just to understand what you're bidding on. Don't just rely on the FCC data sets that are basically numerical listings. You need to inspect the information that of where you're going to bid. So as you think about locational data sets, there are multiple sources, and I'll walk through things that we've looked at. The first is parcels. Parcels represent the polygon of a land record, and it represents ownership and a potential area where broadband may be required. You typically will provide service onto that private piece of land. You can get this from, typically from counties will publish these, so you could go to the county and get the parcel boundaries. But there are third parties who have worked with these government entities and collected it for the nation, and most of those are fairly complete. There are a few trouble spots across the country, or trouble counties across the country, but they are available from third parties if you so wish. The issues with it is, one, it captures all land records, not just those requiring broadband service. There are parcels with many broadband service locations on them, for example, apartments, condos, so you need to be aware of that. And there are broadband service locations that can span multiple parcels. And then finally, as I indicated, parcels are incomplete in parts of the country. This is a visual view of those parcel points. The green boundaries that you see are the parcel that we collected for this area. The purple dots are the centroid, or the central point of that polygon that you see for the parcel. And if you're going to use parcel information, this is basically what you may have from that data. And you can see that you have parcel points on parcels that have no structures on them. You have parcel points that don't indicate actually where you have to deliver service. So there are some detriments to just using parcel data. The next source is imagery, or commercial building footprints. These represent the polygons of building structures. Since they're a broadband structure and broadband service is typically delivered to a structure, it provides the full census of all structures to which service could be delivered. You can get some of this information in a limited manner in the public. Microsoft published a data set back in June of, I think, 2018. It's a nice starter set, but it's a bit dated. We're not sure what the imagery that was used to create it, and it's not been refreshed since that point, and we know it's missing a lot of buildings. There are third-party sources, some that have nearly complete representation of all buildings in the country. So what are the issues here that you need to consider if you're going to use this product? One, it captures all buildings, not only those requiring service. It may not capture address or the structure type, so what kind of structure is it? And depending on the area, some areas may be incomplete. This next image shows you what those building or footprint data products look like. Typically, it's the polygon of the building underneath, and then from that polygon, you can find the centroid of the polygon. So you can see we've identified all the buildings in this image, including garages, barns, huts, and whatnot. So the problem here is you have to start to figure out how to filter out the data to make sure you get a good representation of where broadband needs to be delivered. The next potential data source is addresses. Addresses, typically you have to tie to a geocoder. The addresses are typically what are deliverable points for the Postal Service, but it may represent broadband serviceable locations. You may have this internally. You may be able to find it in government or open on the web via like Open Address, or you can buy it from third-party sources. The issues with addresses to be aware of is not all addresses represent a service location. Some service locations do not have an address. And to determine the location, you have to use geocoding, which can be imprecise in rural areas. And as I indicated earlier, if you use internal records, that may not be a complete listing of all the broadband serviceable locations in the census blocks of interest. And again, here's an image that shows you what that may look like for that same area. And what you may find is address data sets may actually have an address for a parcel, but that parcel has not been built on. So you may get dots on open land, and without other information, you may overrepresent how many locations you may have to build to. So in our view, there's no single source of information. You really need to go across all these data sets and really combine them to create the best locational data set, and that is what we have done. But there are, in certain counties, E911 data may provide a good starting point. But again, you need to be careful to review that information and understand what needs to be augmented. So we suggest that you combine multiple sources. And that's what our product is, if you're interested, is the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric. We combine the layers that I talked about previously, and we've gone through a learning exercise, machine learning, statistical models, to identify what we believe is that broadband serviceable location. In that process, we've also brought in tax assessor records and roads to help us understand and interpret the information better. We've also implemented what we call visual verification, where if the information is not provide confidence that we understand what is on that parcel, we will send it out to a team that actually visually inspects satellite images to identify where that broadband serviceable location is. So our broadband serviceable location aggregates hundreds of millions of data points and applies, as I said, statistical scoring, managed crowdsourcing for visual verification to identify the rooftop locations of all serviceable locations in the country. So you can see here just some samples. On the left is address data. Empty parcels are addressed and show up. On the right, the broadband serviceable location fabric. Again, another example. Address and parcel information on the left, the fabric on the right. And you can see that you need to really farm the sources to get a complete representation of the buildings that you'll need to deliver service to. So let me step back to a broad or a nationwide view of looking at locations and why locations matter. When we looked at our fabric data and summarized the counts of fabric points in the census blocks that are eligible and compared it to the FCC, you can see that when we compared, only 25% of the census block groups count were within 10% of what the FCC provided. So if the FCC provided 100, we were within 10% of that 25% of the time. So it's important to understand that there are gives and takes on both sides. And what you're seeing here is just that give and take of differential between what we observed as the location counts in the census block groups versus the FCC. And you can see those variations can be quite large. Again, looking at the state of Ohio, if you're interested in bidding in portions of the state, you need to understand that maybe a portion of the state is undercounted in a consistent manner, that they don't outweigh or weigh out each other together, that in the end you're okay. So you just need to understand that locational count differential. So now let me jump into how we have been helping our clients, and this is more just to kind of to help you understand and give you some thoughts on how you might want to do it. Put together that business case and really understand RDOF. So what you're seeing here is an area that we're looking at, and it's really what you need to understand is where is it you want to focus your efforts on. So we've picked an area in California and said, let's look at what information is available. The black boundaries you see here are the census block group boundaries. The color that you see underneath, the blue and the yellow, are the eligible census block groups. And I'll indicate why we have that color coding in a second. The second part of the process is you need then to define what is your potential service area. So we've identified potentially areas that if we are doing a fiber build out or fixed wireless, those areas served by a common splitter or a common tower. And we've identified those up front just to get a kind of a general conceptual feeling. We then overlay that on the RDOF blocks to understand what is available within the service footprint that I'm thinking about. But more importantly to consider is what is available in the areas abutting the area I want to build out. I may be missing some gems of high funding, but potentially low cost because I can extend my service out with relatively lower cost than someone else who may come in just to build that area. And then finally, you want to bring in the location so I understand what it is that I'm building to in those locations. So what we did is we brought in all the locations from our fabric, overlaid it onto the map so you can see what is eligible in the areas of the RDOF. So there are some RDOF census blocks which we find do not have any locations in currently. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't in the future, and you have to be worried about that, but currently there may be some census blocks without locations in them. And that's where really the location helps. As you look at this, you can start to visualize that business case of, I'm going to build out from the city center into these areas, and how can I put that business case together? And finally, before I hand it off to Will, that locational data, should be accurate, because as you think about your business case, you have to understand the drops that you may have to run, or the external antennas you may have to mount for a fixed wireless solution. And if you don't have those locations accurately identified, it can have a fairly significant impact on the business case you put together, the capital requirements that you may incur that may cause you problems down the road. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Will and let Will talk about the Vetro Fiber Map platform and how it can help you in the analysis of RDOF.
Thanks, Jim. Hey, everybody, this is Will Mitchell. I'm the CEO at Vetro Fiber Map. I'm here with my associate, Nick Roy. We're going to do a bit of a lightning walkthrough of some manual design and some illustration of this data in action, so to speak. We'll call this design time for the next 20 minutes. And next slide. There we go. So Vetro Fiber Map is a fiber management platform. It's a GIS tool, and it kind of covers the ground as illustrated up above. The planning activities Jim was getting at, and we talked about them in the first webinar in some detail, how to kind of plan and figure out where to look and where to go deeper. And the going deeper includes the design that we're here to talk about today a little bit. The operate over on the right is kind of, well, I'll describe a little bit too, but focus today is on the design. And we're going to show a little bit of a live demo. So there's three things that we want to kind of touch on. Number one, in order to do this activity, this exercise, you need to start with good data, which Jim's been talking about on the point level, the target points, in a layered geographic information system, the GIS tool. That GIS can be a basic desktop GIS, such as ARC or QGIS, or it can even be a Google Earth type tool. The one you're going to see today is our fiber management platform that takes that concept into an interactive web map environment focused on fiber. Number two, we're going to do the design to the RDOF auction target blocks and block groups. This geography is driving the whole thing, and that's putting it in context is critical. Number three, we'll carry that design forward into a project estimate that includes the assignment of materials and equipment and labor costs to get the design built. And then number four here is sort of, we call it a bonus ball, because that's the operate stage. If you happen to do your design work in a fiber management platform and it carries forward to a winning bid, you're one step ahead in that you have an operational platform and an operational map to work with. And that, next slide, please. Okay, so the exercise afoot here is a manual design. So I've tasked Nick with telling me what it's going to cost to build out to an area that I've identified in my planning, and he's the design engineer. He's going to show some digitizing. So digitizing can be quite tedious. It's fine if you have a small area and if you know the area and you know how you want to lay things out and you have that expertise. If, on the other hand, and some folks we've talked to are evaluating massive swaths of the country or many project areas, and they're short on time. If that's the case, you may need design automation. On the bullets here, you'll see, different ways to approach that. If you have a design in hand, wherever you got it, maybe an engineering firm, maybe you've already built it, you can import that into a fire management tool to carry forward into the project estimate type stage. If you use a design automation engine tool, again, you can carry that output into a fire management tool like this. And then if you need an auto design, well, something akin to the picture on the left, covering thousands of locations in short order, CostQuest has an engine and can model a run for you and bring it to life in Vetro. One more slide. There we go. This is just a glimpse of that operational view where I just wanted to, we're not going to show this today much, but I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that the fire management platforms in general, and ours in particular, have a focus on connectivity. So it isn't just the routes of where the fiber goes or where the network elements are placed. You need to manage the details of the strand records, the fiber strands, how they're connected, and that connectivity becomes your asset management system and network documentation system. So with that, I'm going to invite Nick to walk us through a few things in an interactive map environment, which is a little more fun to look at. And our slides, here we go. Nick, I'll just describe what we're seeing for a minute and then let you take over. So you've got a Google map type base map here, and over the nature of a GIS is such that you have layers of map information, and just GIS 101. You'll see on the left in this particular interface there are bundles of data. Up top there's a customer group. You can toggle things on and off. You go down to fiber related elements. We have fiber cables, we have network points. You can continue, and this is, as you're seeing, it's a bit of a mix of market and reference data as well as network data. But here, if you toggle on your census blocks, for example, you're going to see the power of a robust GIS where you can render 11 million polygons across the country and get some information about them. We'll turn that off for now. Finally, what we're here for is RDOF. So the RDOF bundle will show you the block groups, the RDOF block groups that are deemed eligible. And you can see they're quite extensive. And then the blocks within those block groups, to clarify again, the block group is the bidding unit for the auction, and the blocks are the containers of the locations that are funding eligible. So that's just a little glimpse at layers in a GIS environment. And Nick, if you want to zoom in on that Southern Cal area a little more, we can now turn on what Jim was showing you, which would be the neighborhood boundaries. And this was the illustration of an operational footprint. I realize that what you're seeing here is quite a mix of lines that blend together. This can become a puzzle, a jumble, which is where the mapping tools really help you sort things out. Yeah, if you turn off the RDOF there for a moment and leave just the block groups, that's great. You'll see these neighborhoods or operational areas for a network, in this case, the hypothetical network. And as Jim was pointing out, you can see which block groups might be adjacent or nearby. And if you select one of those, you'll see on the left, we're presenting some attribute detail associated with that boundary. The very first couple of items on there are simply the ID, which is what you've gotten from the FCC as an eligible block group. The state and county. The location count as published, in this one there are 1,209, and the annual reserve price for the auction at $36,175, and that's the annual price. And remember, this is a 10-year funding, so times 10 would be the total amount potentially available in that area. Now, if you if you're starting to see now the combination of, let's say, my area of interest in the sort of blue-gray versus the funding available geographies now in orange down below, and that intersection is pretty important. Nick, if we want to show one of those neighborhoods, if we click on the analysis tool, there's another way to take a look at this stuff, and we're skipping the RDOF here for a moment and just showing what this could look like on my geography, your geography of interest. Whether it's fixed and drawn like this or whether you're drawing it on the fly, you can see in the top left some estimated build costs at the highest level. So this is based on road miles, and that you're seeing in that highlighted area, we've got 74-ish road miles and an estimated cost of just under 2 million. And then there's some other summary right below that. You'll see in this area, we've got the cost plus fabric points loaded in, and you're getting a high level summary. This is across multiple block groups and blocks. This is summarizing into my own geography of interest. All right, Nick, why don't we go down to take a look at the block group that's fully contained, and we can zoom in there in the middle of this area. And this is an area we've chosen to kind of focus on, just to show some digitizing and design. And as you can see, it intersects multiple network build areas, but it's fully contained. So this is infill type activity in our area of current operations. We can turn off those overlay neighborhoods now and begin to get into some more detail. Here you'll see that same sort of information at the block group level. This particular block group has $82,000 available as an annual reserve price. And then we will turn on first the blocks in the area, and then the locations that Jim was getting at. So you can see here there are a number of blocks in the area. Most of the locations in this block group, when we saw the large number, are in the southeast and not eligible. But in the north and the northwest, there are some clusters of locations that we want to build to. It's similar to what Jim pointed out too earlier. You'll see right in the middle, there's a block in this block group that has no locations, and two on the bottom in the southwest that have maybe one each. So it is important to see where those actual physical locations are. And Nick, why don't you go ahead and show us a little design activity, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how we are going to design to a particular block group. So in this scenario, we've found a group that we've decided is worth building out to, and so we need to do a few things. The first thing we need to do is actually get that area connected. Second thing we need to do is build a design out to the homes in that area, and then get a cost for the third option would be to get a cost for that build and make sure that that cost is accurate. So I'm just going to switch a few things around here real quick while I get that set up. And we're going to jump over first to our point of presence and where this is going to start. So I've designated that right here at this location. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch my base maps over to ensure that I have an accurate view of the landscape here. So I'm just going to switch over to a hybrid view. So this is where our data center or our point of presence is located. And if we zoom out here, this is that block group. And we need to build into, this block right up here. So to create that path, we at Vetro have a tool called Quick Plan. And we'll go ahead and just simply zoom into the area we want to build to. We can click a point on the map that we want to start our network to this area. It will route from our point of presence to that location. It is going to create a buffer around this route and pull in any of those business or premise points that are along that route within a 100-foot buffer of that cable, and allow us to see what additional customers we could hit along that way. We can also update those settings. So it's about
31,000 feet to reach that location, and we can update the cost per road length. So we can update that cost per mile here, and that will update for us right here on the fly. Now, once we do this, we can go ahead and save this route off as a cable. We can save the buffer off as well to pull reports from, but we'll go ahead and save this route. We'll save this as a backbone in this case. We'll grab our project and plan and save it here. So now we have actually created the route to this customer, to these new potential customers. So I'm just going to switch gears here. So now that we have our route to the area established, we need to go ahead and start digitizing to the potential customers. So we'll switch over to our second plan here. We can enable that for editing. And now it's time to digitize. This can be done very quickly. We'll draw in our lateral in this case. Now we can zoom in and sort of follow the telephone poles along this route to ensure that we have an accurate location for our cable. And we'll just end it off right there. Once we want to start getting our customers connected, we can go ahead and place a fiber access terminal along this route. Now, to ensure that I'm getting this at the right location, what I can also do is quickly just get a view of that pole to make sure that I have an accurate representation of that location. All right. So here I can ensure that I have the correct pole that I'm looking to place this on. And that's the one. So we'll jump down here and place our fiber access terminal. We can save that off, place our customer location, and draw in our drop. So this is going to ensure that we have the build actually physically created. So when it comes time to show my boss, where we're building out, how our architecture is designed, I can go ahead and show them that here. Now, once I have established a network to all of the service locations in this area, I can go ahead and start grabbing my costing. So I'm just going to switch over to my already built out plan here. And we can see this network that I've built out into this area. So in order to capture my cost, I need to capture a few different cost types. So I have my physical costs for my network. I need to capture my labor costs as well as any one-off costs as well. So I'm going to jump into this fiber access terminal, and at any network point, I can go ahead and start associating expenses. So if I jump into the expense tab, I have my aerial fiber access terminal material template associated to this point. I can do this for my network points or any connection equipment that I have at those points. So my splitter in this case, I would jump in, associate the correct material template to that splitter, and I can go ahead and save that off. Now, in order to get an accurate cost for building out to this area, we need to capture that labor and those soft costs as well. And we can handle all of this in the dashboard here. And in the dashboard, we have the ability to create labor profiles. And so I have created this labor profile to associate labor costs to all of the different part types in the network. So I have my splitters, I have install costs for my laterals and backbones, as well as a construction permit, so a one-off cost. Now, once I have all of this information sort of established, I can then pull it all out into a report. And that is going to be a plan estimate, which I'll pull up here. And in this plan estimate, we have the breakdown of all of our different costs. So again, we have those associated labor costs, we have the materials, and we have our fixed costs. And those are all broken down in this top section into our different subtotals. So we have our subtotals with our 10% contingency here, but we've also broken them down by mile. So we can see per mile how much it costs to do this build. And that way, when we are looking at other RDOF blocks and we want to use our analysis tool, we can have a much more accurate representation of the cost per mile there. Now, I'm under the a little bit under the wire, and my boss wants to get Will wants to get not only the cost of building out this network, but he wants to see the footprint and sort of where we've designed. So I can send him over that plan estimate, and in order to allow him to view where I have built this network, I would just go ahead and export this. So I would pull out my particular plan. I can select whichever layers I want him to see. So I'll select my network layers in this case. I'll select my plan. I'll pull it out into KMZ. And once I have that established, I can go ahead and pull that up in Google Earth for him so he can get a visual representation of where I've sort of built this entire network out to. And if we zoom in here, it's going to show not only the footprint of the network, but all of those associated attributes such as length and any other information that we were looking to capture there as well. So this is a way that you can get an estimate for building out to a particular area so that you can be much more accurate in those bids.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate the demonstration and sharing the file. And just for context, if you flip back to your retro map, whoop, that's okay, you don't need to, but we're utilizing the location fabric, both for the summary counts for a given area and for the targets for that detailed design exercise. And ultimately for the first stage of the auction, you just need to determine whether it makes sense to go after a certain area. For the second stage, you have to submit an actual design, which the fiber management type GIS platform lets you create and generate. We're a little bit sandwiched here between things that CostQuest does, and we complement each other nicely. I think Jim's going to tell you a little bit now about how you can skip some of the tedious digitizing and get to a modeled business case that kind of gives you the similar level of detail on the build elements, coupled with business costs and potential revenues even, to get a business case out of this exercise. Here you go, Jim.
Thanks, Will, and thank you for that presentation, you and Nick. Nice job on just kind of showing how you can build on a platform, whether it's in Vetro or some other fiber management tool. What I'm going to bring it back to is, now that you've kind of thought about the area you want to build in, now that you've looked at some of the fiber design cost, let's talk about the business case. So as Will mentioned, our auto design, the CostQuest auto design, is available in the Vetro platform. It allows you to quickly design an area in a short time frame and get that layout that Nick showed you. And from that, we can then provide back to you the quick business case. And that business case not only is the upfront capital, it includes the success-based capital. It provides an estimate of the take rate and potential revenue and operational costs. So let me just walk through that. So as you think about your build out, the first thing that both Will and I mentioned is you have to figure out, am I only interested in the census block groups that fully are within my service footprint of where I've decided to build? Or do I want to look outside? The issue with census block groups is they're a larger geographic unit and they may not nicely align with your desired build out area. So you have to consider that if you want to go after a census block group because you can't serve all the customers. Or alternatively, do I need to adjust my service footprint to grow out? So we'll walk through that. The other thing to consider is, as I run the business case, these are questions that I walk through with my clients to help understand what it is they need to really succeed in the auction. So first is this a new build out area for you, or is it an incremental build over existing plant that you may have? So I might be building into an adjoining neighborhood, or I may have a copper network that I want to now grow into fiber. That's kind of that first question. And then the next question is, are you building only to the RDOF census block groups or to the larger area? And that larger area here, I mean, are you building to the kind of the checkerboard pattern underneath of those census blocks that aren't eligible, but are adjoining to the census blocks that are eligible? So it's really understanding what it is you want to build first, and then putting the business case behind it together. And what I would recommend is first run that business case of kind of the area excluding the RDOF census block. So say you're considering building out fiber in your service footprint already, and you know there are areas you want to build to. Take the census blocks that are not RDOF, run that business case, and then run a second business case that includes those RDOF census blocks along with the census blocks you're considering, and look at the incremental difference. That increment really is what is caused by the addition of those RDOF census blocks, and that really should be part of the economics that you should consider when pulling together your auction bid. The other thing to consider is what costs are incremental. If this is a new build area, well, I don't have customer billing. If it's a new build area and I'm a new company in the area, I may need to incur billing. I may need to get access to poles and conduit. I may need to hire service technicians in the area. Alternatively, if this is an area I'm already in, I may have billing functions. I may have poles and conduit I can use. I may have service technicians. So it's really understanding that incremental cost of serving the RDOF area. The next item that's key is, what is the term of the business case? While RDOF is for 10 years, you got the conflicting lives of the fiber of being 25 to 30 years, and a bond or a loan that you may take out to build the area may be a 20-year loan. So you really need to consider what is that business case and what is the extent of the RDOF funding that you can assume. Is it going to end at 10 years, or do you make some assumptions that you may get some some continuing funding in the area, whether it's via the state, the feds, or someone else may provide additional funding? It's those items you need to consider as you think about that term of your business case. Another big attribute is, what is the take rate? As Will showed you in the Vetro platform, you can look at what current providers are in the area. You can also look at the 477 to collect similar information, to understand who is there and who may I compete against, not only in the RDOF auction, but after the RDOF auction. You also need to understand expected growth in business and population over time. You will be potentially held accountable to the housing units and business locations that are there 8 years from now. So it's really a good understanding of what are the projected paths. Finally, what's the added capital that will be required over the time period? You have to understand that your plant will fail. Fiber may be cut, poles may be hit. You need to work in that failure rate into your business case to make sure you've got all your costs considered. And then finally, the FCC funding starts early. As soon as the auction is complete, the loan forms are filled in, and the funding is released, you start to get funding, but you don't have to have a full build out for 6 years. So it's understanding how you want to stage that build out. It may be advantageous to do it immediately to get the customer revenue in quickly, or it may be more advantageous to build out certain areas and hold other areas out until later time periods. So again, things to consider as you pull together your business case. If we go back to this area in California, we've identified the census blocks and census block groups that we're interested in. And in this version of the map, we've actually identified those census blocks that we identified do not have any locations in that we can identify. So there's a big block here, and as Will mentioned, there's a couple blocks scattered throughout that we just do not see any locations in. Again, important to consider as you pull together your business case. As you look at this area, before I jump to the next map or table, what we're looking at here is just the green is those census blocks that are wholly within my service footprint. The blue are then if I ooch out a bit and become more aggressive in my bidding pattern. What we provide here in this table is just that kind of analysis to help you understand what is the potential benefit of potentially growing out your service footprint. So we put together a high estimate, and that is any census block group that is intersected or touched by your service profile or your service boundary. And here we identified 22 million of reserve available over the 10-year time period. However, if I'm more conservative and I'm only going after those census block groups in which the census blocks are fully enveloped within my area, the funding drops down to 8 million. If I loosen that a bit and say, oh, if the census block group has 75% of the census blocks within, it changes just a bit. And then finally, you can look at locations. Where are the locations in which that mostly all of them fall within my boundary? Again, it jumps up to 9.2. So again, just a way to look at that RDOF funding to make sure you make the right decision of where you want to bid at. Then you can put together the business case. Here for this area, we've identified that there are actually 90,000 total locations in the entire service footprint. This is footprint including the RDOF locations. For that build out, we estimate $78 million will be required. That's both upfront and success-based over a 10-year period. We estimate total annual cost, total operational cost to come up with that run rate, that annual run rate. We can compare that annual run rate to the potential annual revenue. That annual revenue is based upon an assumed take rate that we have in this area of 25%. So it appears that there's a lot of competition in this area. And this is the full area, not just the RDOF census blocks. And in the end, you can see if I potentially may make money or lose money. If I'm losing money, that starts to form the basis of your RDOF business case. So let me finish up and open it up to questions that have been posted for us. How can we help? We can provide those vetted locations, those rooftop locations that we mentioned earlier. We can help you on the RDOF estimates and information to help set your strategy. We can provide that cost and investment data. We can provide competitive analysis of who's in the area, what might they bid, and then finally, as we'll talk through, we can help on the planning, designing, and operation of that network so that when you bid, you are comfortable in the numbers that you bid. When you win, you have a network plan ready to go. And when you build, you have that operational platform to manage the network. And with that, I thank you for your time today. And now, Stephen, I'll open it up to questions.
Hey, thanks, Jim. So we have a couple questions in here, and folks, feel free to type in as we're chatting here, and we're monitoring the flow. We'll get to them as we can. Any that we don't get to, we'll circle back with you after the fact. So the first one here, Jim, is for you. Can you talk a little bit about any differences that you have noticed in looking at various data sources between FCC location counts and how that may vary based on other data sources you're looking at?
Yeah, what we found is the FCC location counts, one, are at a census block group level. So you have to be aware of that. And when we look at the eligible or the locations within the eligible census blocks, what we're finding is that there is a good deal of variation, census block group to census block group. On average across the country, it may not be that different, but once you're in the area of your interest, we're finding that, as I indicated earlier, 25% of the time, the location counts provided by the FCC are within 10% of the location counts that we identify using all the available current data sources that we have.
Great, that's helpful. And can you talk a little bit about, I believe this question is about the business case modeling you went through. Can you talk about how take rate is determined or should be determined in sort of best practice about that?
Yeah, what you have to first do is understand what level of competition do you have in that area. And the quickest way to get that is the FCC's 477 data, which provides to you census block by census block who provides service in that area. And it's not just the RDOF blocks that you need to look at. You need to look at those that are adjacent to the RDOF blocks to understand who may be bidding in that area and what they may bid. The second thing you need to consider is what type of service do they provide? Are they providing just DSL? Are they providing fixed wireless? Are they providing coax? Or are they providing a fiber service? Understanding that, you understand what is your potential take rate. If you deploy fiber in an area, most likely you'll have a differential above DSL, fixed wireless, and potentially cable HFC service, simply for the fact it's just a superior service and you may be able to offer other attributes. So it's taken into consideration the who's in the area, along with what technology are they using to provide service in the area, helps you form what you might think your take rate may be. The other thing you can look at is also the Pew Internet Study. The Pew Internet Study does provide analysis of the uptake, the general market uptake in an area based upon household income level. So if you bring in the demographics, you can understand quickly if I'm in a high income area, the Pew study will indicate that they will potentially have a much higher general market uptake of broadband than a low income area. So knowing the demographics behind, along with the competitive overlay, really helps you understand what your potential take rate may be.
That's great. And here's a question I think for both Will and Jim. When you're talking about structures and FCC counts and MDUs, right? How can you speak a little bit to how folks should be thinking about structures versus living units?
Yeah, well, I'll take a first shot and then you can add in on the structures versus living units. So structure that we've identified, and as I walk through the building footprints that are provided by third parties, simply identify from the sky, is there a building there? It doesn't necessarily tell you the number of inhabitants or number of living units within that building. For example, an apartment, how many are in that? And that's where you need to bring in other informational sources to help identify how many units are within that. I have to say it's one of the more difficult things to identify. And in certain counties, it's much harder because the tax assessor does not provide complete information. Yet in other counties, the tax assessor may tell you how many living units are in that building. So part of it is trying to find a good data source to help you understand. And then once you do understand, you need to use that in your build out trajectory to not only understand how many potential customers who provide revenue to you, but how many ONUs or antennas I need to install at that location to provide service.
That's a good answer, Jim. This is Will. All I would add is that we try to accommodate that when we think in GIS terms in a multi-dimensional fashion where you've got unit counts attached to those fabric locations, whether it's a single, it would be a one, or maybe it's a triple decker, a three apartment kind of stacked building. That's a single target. Essentially, if you're doing a fiber drop, you're probably usually going to follow that one path to get those 3 apartments. So you kind of have to look at it in different scales. The aggregation at the aggregation unit, when you're summarizing an area, you want unit counts for the potential subscriber count or customer count. But at the design level, you're looking more at the structure of the building, the poles, the drops, and routing to that building. So a couple different angles on that.
Got it. That's great. We're running out of time here, but a quick lightning round for you guys. Is there, can you talk a little bit about assumptions you all use in Vetro and then in our modeling on CQA side for the capital estimates and whether there's assumptions for homes passed or anything like that?
Jim, I'll go first because I'm going to be quick. We essentially provide a container in which the user drives those assumptions. So if you're doing the cost per mile high level costing, you simply key in $20,000 or $30,000 depending on where you are. There's so much variability around the country and with conditions on the ground that we put it in the user's hands to put in their assumptions.
Yeah, and on our side, when we pulled together the business case, we look at a number of factors to help understand what that cost per mile is. One is what is the mix of aerial, buried, and underground plant? What is the terrain in the area to help us understand if you have to trench, what will be the costing of trenching? We also look at density. Density is a big driver of the cost. If it's a high density area, you may have to build at certain times of the day. You may have different permitting costs. So we try and pull all that together based upon the relevant information associated with the census block or census block group that we're looking at.
Great. Quick hit. Jim, Will, any closing thoughts? And if you have one suggestion to offer to the audience based on where they're at in their planning, what would it be?
Yeah, I'll first, Will, and then I'll hand it off to you. I mean, the biggest thing to me is, one, as I've talked through the presentation, is make sure you know where you're going to bid in. Two, make sure you have a good locational data set, whether it's ours, someone else's. Just understand where you need to build to, and understand if potentially the FCC's number is high or low, to understand if that reserve actually that you're thinking about is sufficient for the area you want to build in. So it really comes down to location and really understand the RDOF available in your area before you start.
Yeah, thanks, Jim and Stephen. I just want to say thanks to the Fiber Broadband Association for hosting us. I don't have any huge words of wisdom. We're kind of rolled up sleeves down in the nuts and bolts of digitizing maps and inventorying network, doing designs and putting some costs together in our platform. We have a lot of folks around the country using it. Again, like Jim said, with the data, it's not the only platform out there. You can use a desktop GIS. You can use other fiber management software. I would just say, get in there and get your mapping going. The sooner the better to get to an accurate build estimate and ultimately a design to submit. And hopefully you win in the auction and go build it.
That's great. With that, I figure we can close out. Huge thank you to Will and Jim and Nick for presenting today. And of course, thank you to Fiber Broadband Association for hosting us and for the continued partnership there. And for all of you on the line who joined in today, thank you so much. Again, recordings will be available on both the FBA website and the CostQuest website to view when should you want to review it. And a copy of the slides will be sent to you in a follow-up. Thanks, everyone.